And we're live. Eddie,
Whoa!
what about that for a countdown, Eddie?
I feel like I'm walking into Gladiator, the movie or something. Very good.
Oh, we bring
Uh,
out the best for you, Eddie. How are you getting on?
we're all good. Thanks very much. Yes, I'm. Now, people might think I'm in a penthouse apartment here, but I'm
Yeah,
actually in the Midlands in County Laois. So I am. It looks like my New York loft, but
your New York
the,
loft. You'll be
the,
popping in for a dip straight
well,
after this, will you?
the beauty of being in the Midlands is that you're able to get out and access green spaces straight away.
Mhm. Yeah, fantastic, fantastic. Well, listen, Eddie, you're very welcome. I'll introduce the webinar first, and then I'll introduce yourself. So, hi and welcome everyone. This is the latest in our Work Well live webinar series. So if it's your first time joining, the goal of our Work Well webinars is to promote and share ideas and advice that can support in improving our own well-being and the well-being of our colleagues and our wider work environment. So the live webinars are just one part of the Work Well community. We also have the Work Well podcast, we have blogs, we have a private forum, and we have an online education hub called the Work Well Institute. And all of our Work Well resources are curated through our free weekly Work Well newsletter. So if you go to workwellireland.ie, you can sign up to the mailing list for free. Now, introduce our guest today, although he doesn't really need an introduction, but Dr. Eddie Murphy is a clinical psychologist and an adjunct associate professor at UCD School of Psychology. He's a well-known TV psychologist where his trusted style, practical, respectful, and hope-oriented approach has a strong solution focus. He's also an author of the bestseller, Becoming Your Real Self, a practical toolkit to manage everyday problems. And that's kind of apt for today because we're talking about managing the return to the workplace. So Eddie, you're very welcome to our webinar today.
Super, yeah. I really appreciate being here, and I'm looking forward to real engaging conversation with lots of people. And thank you for. And I want to know that I think after our 40 or 50 minutes here today, that I want you, the participant, to be walking away with the knowledge, tools, things that you can use straight away that you can put in for yourself and your workplace, your community, to manage this return to the office. I think it's important that we recognize that work has gone on through this pandemic. So often it's really what we're talking about is this return to workplace. And I've done a number of talks over the years. I've done many different talks, but particularly around reconnecting, this reconnecting into the workplace as people are coming back, whether it be hybrid model or remote, moving from the home back into the office environment. This is a process of change. And I really want to go through some psychological insights into that, maybe tools that you can use, and we'll get going with that. So we will.
Brilliant. Thanks, Eddie. And I'll just note for anyone who's tuning in, we're going out live on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. So whatever platform you're tuning in on, you can make a comment in the comment section and we'll see it here. So if you have a question for Eddie, if you have a comment on anything that's going on, please use whatever kind of platform you're using to comment and we'll see it here. So please use that because I think you're going to try and make this as interactive as possible, as you always do, Eddie.
Yeah, and so what? No, I want to acknowledge that from very early days. We're two men here, but it's actually International Women's Day, and I think it's very important. Like for me as a psychologist, and my whole working career in healthcare. Previously, I was a nurse, a general nurse, and I worked in intensive care, cardiology, and critical aspects of physical healthcare, and then I moved into mental health care, and then my interest in the whole area of mental well-being and using positive psychology as well is that been surrounded by women all my life, brilliant women, powerful women, insightful, wise women. I've learned from them, and I just want to acknowledge that on International Women's Day. I think it's critically important that we do that.
Yeah, well said, Eddie. Thanks for saying that.
And I know that we tried to get another a woman speaker, and didn't work out in the last minute for us. So that's real unfortunate. But we were very conscious of that as well. So what I want to really go through this returning to the workplace, but what I'd like to ask people, if you could just give me a score, 0 to 100, just put a number in, 0 to 100, in the first 6 months of the pandemic, 2019, where would you rate your levels of stress in the first 6 months? And if you can just pop a score in there, and we'll just I can do a quick aggregate score. We'd love to see that. So we would in our chat function on the right hand side. That'd be great. So you can pop the numbers in there. And what we're in the really is we're in this adaptation, a time of change, incredible change coming in. So it is. I'd love to know as also where you're coming in from. So I would. That's something that I'd be really interested in as well. What part of where are you coming in from? Have we any overseas viewers and stuff like that? And thanks very much. I see that there's some people are coming in high, like 7, and some people are low. And I don't know if that 7 is a 70, 0 to 100, or if
I
that's
think it's
0
just
to
a 7.
it's a 7. So
Yeah.
so low impact, but you can see like there's 60s, 80s, and 70s, and what we don't really know is that it obviously had a significant impact of COVID pandemic, and the average scores would have been around the 60s and 70s, as in the impact. So what I want to know then really is, I'd love to know now on this facing for you. You can mark this for yourself personally, or I always think like, you can think of this talk today as from not from the human doing point of view, but the human being. And it's not about the roles that we occupy, it's about the person that we're in. So, and I think that's critically important. Like, it's the human being, very important, really, as opposed to the human doing. And taking this time out is significantly important. So, where would you rate your concerns about return to work for yourself or your colleagues, 0 to 100? Where would you rate that in terms of how? So 0 is low numbers. It's like it's stress free. It's no problem. We're going to get on with it. Or as you get higher, it's going to be more challenging. It's going to be more concerning. It's going to be more stressful for people. And I'd love to hear what's going on now as you're facing this return to the office environment, because we must remember work continued, and that's very important. But where would you now put your? So what I'm interested now is where you just put a round of numbers in where you think how challenging this is going to be, how stressful, and because I think that's really for some people, and this is what it's like so for some people are looking at 30s and 90s. That's very high. Then there's 50s. So if you can just keep coming in with them, because I think it's definitely not a 5, 10, or 20. For some people it can be like that, but for others it's going to be rumbling. And for others, actually, what I notice is that there's a significant group of people who actually their life had adjusted into the home working, and now we're into a big shift. And the big shift is a big change, and change always generates levels of stress. And the question in life is like, do we change the situation? And I suppose that's where you look at this whole area of the great reset, or often people talk about the great resignation or the great churn in employment opportunities, versus do we change our mindset? Do we change the situation or change our mindset? And I know as a lot of people too are putting in the challenges that this is going on. And actually, I'd like to, if you could actually add in those challenges. So I know for some people around change the work-life balance, the commuting is going to be an issue. But maybe, and I love the wisdom of the tribe. I love engaging conversations, because what do you think are the key challenges for this return to the office? For some people, it'll be childcare. For some people, it'll be doggy care, because they'll have Velcro dogs. These are like dogs that have been at home in the home environment, and a Velcro dog is where your dog. If you walk around, you're going to the toilet. The dog is following you around. For some people, it'll be obviously with the situation out in Ukraine that there's a significant increase now in fuel prices. Childcare. So for some people, they're talking about this is really interesting now. So commuting, work-life balance, establishing real connections. So for some people, they'll be coming into the work environment with having maybe only virtual colleagues, particularly if you're new to organizations. I think there's a piece of work there for HR and people managers around assisting people to reconnect. And I'm going to talk specifically about a number of populations that would, I think, have more challenges. People like with social anxiety. I think it's a piece daily structure. I think it's a big issue. People have lost sight of how to look after themselves first. They were on survival mode, and now they need to remind themselves of what it feels like to be well. Okay, that's interesting. Helping the team to readjust and being back in the office and being well. Care responsibilities. So some people will be in the younger, older children. Some people are in the sandwich generation, and the cost, waste of time commuting. Dog care. I'm in with the dog care. That's why I brought up. Also struggling to eat differently in the hybrid work. Days in the office focusing on collaboration, and days at home focusing on admin. And I think that's a real insight. And so effectively, there's been this we're now into another period of change. Fundamentally, like change is a constant, and there's a really good book and a resource out there. I'll get Brian to stick it up here in our chat function that you can have it. It's called "Who Moved My Cheese" by Spencer Johnson. I'm sure because a lot of you work in HR and you've read this book, but you might have read it in a while. And I always think there's always a new insight from this book around who moved my cheese. So boundary setting is another one. The worry that companies will not measure the challenges properly to ensure that support employees will take. And I think so. That's a concern that's been raised. And I always say, this is one thing about this, when you're going to, as I'm a psychologist, if you're bringing up something, you're bringing it on behalf of, I love the mode that you can bring up an issue and you're raising it on behalf of others. Or if you're asking a question, you're asking a question on behalf of others. You're not necessarily asking this on behalf of yourself. So it's a good strategy when you're asking a psychology question, because I want you to ask me some questions later on. And we're talking about this whole area of change. So Who Moved My Cheese is all about change. That people hem and haw and sniff and scurry, went to the cheese station every day, and the cheese station disappeared. And similarly, there's massive change. So some people are going to be early adopters, going to come in and are going to embrace, and that's fine. That's about 20% of people. That's what the research shows. Maybe a little bit less. 15% are early adopters, go in and embrace. About 60% of people will just jump on and they'll be slow, but they move with the momentum. And about 30% of people can struggle and some people will struggle with this adjustment. And I think it's worth noting that, because, for example, people with social anxiety, so people who sort of maybe are anxious in a more group-based situation or a company-based situation, whole area of social anxiety can be so now refacing going back into the workplace. Social anxiety is one of the most missed of all the anxiety presentations. And if you're going back into that workplace, and for some people it could be a social anxiety piece and they're having to reconnect. For some people, they're actually, the skills of socialization in the workplace, it just needs to be rewarmed up, as it were. For some people, it will be quite additional stress. And then the question is, are they going to manage about coping with that stress and stuff like that? I'm just conscious now the light is going to just coming in on me there. So I'm just going to adjust my position slightly so that I don't get blinded. So there's some of the concerns that there's subgroups of people that are going to struggle around this work, and then coming back in on the commute around. So there's really practical things that's really it. Like, that's it. It's a sort of a practical shift that's going on around re-entry stress. I think Rowena there has identified, which is a very it's a big reality. So the question is, when it comes to stress, then we often think, like, do we change the situation? And for many people, as I said, may change their situation. But if you bring your same mindset with the situation, then you can re-experience that stress in a newfound situation. Clinically, I would see that often, where people would have moved maybe from different countries around the place as a magic solution, but they brought it their same mindset. And when they brought that same mindset, they actually generated the same issues for themselves and the same problems came. So changing how you think about the situation can be really powerful. And using some cognitive tools, like, is there another way I can think about this situation? Is there another way that, what supports can I put into place? And what I think is sort of important is, an important question, and a question I'd like to ask is, what do you think we've learned that we can carry forward? What did we learn? Like a year ago when we were doing this type of conversations, working well at home, we were talking about boundary setting, about home work life, because effectively what happened was the boundary of work suddenly entered into our home life. So the question now is, I'm asking is, what can we bring forward? What do you think can be helpful that we can bring forward into, that we've learned from the last 2 years, that we can bring into this newfound situation? And do you think there's things that we can, because we don't want to necessarily throw out all the learning as well. Like if you think about it, you've learned to sort of keep yourself safe. You've learned to maybe disengage from a catastrophic news cycle that's ongoing all the time. You've learned to, yeah, you've learned that, what we know is that the strain of COVID has got less making people less sick,
Severe,
I
yeah,
think, over time, severe over time. So I'd love to, if you can pop it into our chat function there, what do you think are the key learnings that you think that we can bring and go forward? What would you think are key learnings that you can go forward? Um, so it's really interesting. Thank you very much, Shane. Around the whole area of asking for help, we've learned how to adjust, create a new way of living, regain control in a sudden situation, the appreciation of working in a team, seeing people, going for coffee, valuing social interaction, community, because without it, we're a bit lost. So it's interesting, like, we've learned how resilient we actually are. We've adapted to working from home better than we ever could have thought we could before COVID. See, I think these are critically important, because often when you try to craft something new going forward, it's actually, you build it on the foundation of what's gone behind. And we've learned to be vulnerable. We've learned our resilience. We've learned coping mechanisms. We've learned, so in a way, I think that's something that I'd lean into, is like, what have we learned? Like, so boundary setting is something that we've learned. Maybe focusing around our own well-being, focusing on connecting with people, because I think that's critically important. So we know that there's reconnecting in the workplace, even though it's going to be stressful. And one of the things we know when it comes to stress or anxiety is, and if I asked you, what, from psychology point of view, what do you think keeps anxiety going? If you think anxiety is a muscle, or stress is a muscle, what's the most maladaptive coping mechanism, do you think? And if you can pop that in there, well, if I was doing a in-live talk in your company now, I'd be handing out books, so I would at this point. So
yeah.
people answer the questions, I'd be throwing out books. Um, so, what do you think is the most maladaptive coping mechanism in modern psychology? People often think, when about psychology, is they think, oh, psychologists look at childhood, incidences or childhood experiences, but actually, in modern psychology, what we're really interested in is, and what we focus on, if you see a lot of my work, is we always ask, what keeps the problem going? What keeps the problem going? So, as opposed to, where did the problem come from, or why? We don't really answer that why question. We don't get into the why, because quite often you can't do anything about the why, but you can definitely do a lot about what keeps the problem going. And when it comes to stress or anxiety, and particularly, with some interesting, so denial, as denying it. So I'm talking about uh, managing your thoughts. So, like we say, negative thoughts or negative self-talks, controlling controllables. But now there's a specific behavior that is the key biggest thing in keeping any anxiety going. Okay, and So I'll let you try and keep going through that. I'll give you help, okay? So imagine, I'm going to go a little bit extreme here, but imagine I had the power in me to deliver a snake into your keyboard or where you're watching now, big snake, or a big spider, or my favorite is a big black rat, and I could just populate your where you're there now with a big black rat. What are you going to do? You can pop that in there. What are you going to do? So I've just populated your space with a rat, a snake, and a spider. One of them items. And I'm no doubt you're going to feel very uncomfortable now. You're going to feel quite stressed and you're going to feel quite anxious. So what are you going to do?
Am I allowed guess?
No, you can't. You
No.
stay out of it. Okay, so
I
Elaine is
think
going to.
Elaine might have it, has she?
Yeah, so you're running away. Susan's
Yeah.
screaming. I'm waiting for someone to pick up. Someone picks up the keyboard and smashes it.
Smashes it.
So, so you're engaged in exactly. You're going to running and legging it, right? And that's called avoidant behavior, avoidance. And when it comes to any level of anxiety, avoidance always keeps the problem going. And in our lives, we don't have to require a snake, or we don't have to um, because stress and anxiety are fundamentally fear. So if I'm coming back into the office and I'm fearful and I'm stressed, I'm concerned about something, if I'm activating my fear system. And if I use avoidance as my strategy, then the avoidance will only amplify that fear. And that's a key thing for. So if you're, particularly if you're a HR professional and you know some people aren't coming back, then it could be an anxiety-based related issue, fear-based issue, and avoidance will only strengthen that. So how do we tackle that avoidance? So we tackle that avoidance through, and I'll just list through a few other things that keep fear going: avoidance, checking behavior, reassurance seeking, uh, um, are all key features of anxiety and fear. But the avoidance is the big one. And if we then talk about graduated, bringing people back in a graduated basis, and this is, I think, is the value of the hybrid model as well, of returning to work. That is both, I think it's a win-win. Workers have shown that they can work from home, and also we need people in a more collaborative, real-world sense to be connected with each other and stuff like that. So a graduated approach is a really valuable strategy to supporting individuals who are a little bit more maybe stressed or anxious about coming back into that workplace. If you have any questions there, I'd love to hear from them. It'll be very interesting to hear that. The other piece that I want to talk about a little bit is around whole area of strength space, like what we talk about there is fear and anxiety and stress is within the sort of the negative space on a continuum. But what keeps well people well? How can we buffer? How can we put in our resources? If you think of your energy levels in your battery, and someone mentioned sleep earlier on, and sleep is the quickest win to our well-being. How do we get our buffers up high so that when we're coming back into this workplace, that we're not overwhelmed, or we're not that our stress is reducing quite quickly? So how do you think you might manage that? So one of the things you might want to look at there is around what keeps well people well. And there's some really interesting findings from the world of positive psychology, and Martin Seligman, who'd be seen as sort of the godfather of that area, and where you're looking at a life of pleasure, meaning, and engagement. A life of pleasure, meaning, and engagement. And years ago, I used to think a lot about meaning and engagement was the dynamo to our well-being. Like when you've got meaning and engagement in your life, whether your passions in your life. So, what are your passions? I'd love to know. I'd love to know some of your passions in your life, because this is the pool of well-being that we can dip into. And some people don't have passions. I like the idea there of Rowena's talked about planning days off around the return to the office days to support sleep and rest. That's good. That's proactive strategy in managing that. It's really, really insightful. Shows again wisdom. But what are your passions in your life? Because things are pleasure, meaning, and engagement. We there's been an absence of pleasure, and I think this is a big thing, that there's been a few opportunities for pleasures, in terms of, like, for me, travel used to be a great pleasure, and it's something I look forward to and stuff like that. Now, if I could imagine had a cone here, a 99 cone, and instead of giving you snakes and spiders, I could put a 99 cone here with chocolate and all the favorite sprinkles that you like in there, and that you're now having this cone. I'm sure it's a very pleasurable thing for you, and I'm sure it's going down very well. And if I give you another one, and pleasure sort of can be short lasting. But the thing about pleasure is we haven't had a lot of pleasures in our in the last period of time, in the last couple of years, because some of our access to pleasure has been taken away through, like, our socialization with our socialization, going to maybe sport, traveling overseas. And this is why I think it's important too that embed some pleasurable activities in your life. I talk about the whole area of work, rest, and play. Work is work, obviously. Rest is a recharge area, and play can be our connection with our beauty and awe of an environment, or travel, or children, animals, and there's, in positive psychology, we know that for some people, they engage, their meaning and engagement is through education, and growth and learning. For others, it's through social justice. And now with the war in Ukraine, people are getting very activated around social justice, and maybe, obviously, they can't control the negative news around that, but we can control our response in terms of donating to the Irish Red Cross, in terms of the food and the different areas that people, the clothing and the different appeals that are ongoing. So that can give us some meaning, and it gives us a sense of some support, that we're supporting others through social justice. For others, to access pleasure and coping mechanisms through the power of nature, or faith, or their belief system, or beauty and awe, meditation, mindfulness. So this can be really powerful, and it can answer some of those big questions that they're trying to do. So in terms of that buffer zone, I think is really important, maybe to start focusing on that buffer zone. And maybe some of that in the workplace can be supporting individuals too, in that small steps taken, connecting with each other, and creating opportunities for that connection. And you see, with what's called habituation, when you don't avoid and you go into a situation, you habituate, and your anxiety and stress levels come down. So that's quite an important learning piece as well. That's just one piece there. Is there any questions you'd like to ask? You pop them through on our piece there. Brian, is there anything you bring in?
Well, Eddie, just on that, I was going to ask about the situation in Ukraine. We've had COVID for 2 years. It just feels like a constant pounding of negativity almost. And now add in, a stressor for many potentially is returning to workplaces around this time. It just feels like this constant kind of negative pressure, I guess. Is it that buffer you're talking about? Is that something we need to actively work on to create some kind of positivity? Is that the way to do it? The connection, or what is it exactly?
So,
Would you
like,
recommend?
I caution about the word positivity in a way, because see, positivity reminds me a little bit of Americanism. Like, hey, guy, I'm all positive, but inside, like, I'm sort of like maybe paddling like a duck. And I'm more into balance than necessarily. And you can have moments of great positivity and moments, but actually having great balance is something that, in work, rest, and play, I think is the key thing. Because if anyone is out of kilter, then we're into a situation where a lot of things can get out of kilter. So I think, though, when it comes to, like, again, what have we learned from this pandemic? If we think about, the pandemic was constant churn of, like, anxiety provoking news. Now we've got another churn of anxiety provoking news, whether it be around, obviously, the humanitarian catastrophe that's occurring, and then the economic costs of that, and there's there's going to be food costs, inflation costs, fuel costs, all these things are going to be coming through, and that's all the narrative that we're going to be hearing for a long time. And we got to learn, like, okay, how do we can't, there's certain things we can't control. We can't control how much we consume of that. So we might say, I'm going to consume an amount of that I need to know, but because I can't control it, I'm going to switch the rest of it off.
Yeah.
It's a bit like, in a way, like, I'd imagine people are less consumed by watching COVID numbers now, unless you're working in healthcare or stuff like that. Like, it's sort of, so similarly, I think we have to use what we've learned around hitting balance and around this area.
Okay, yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. I try to minimize the amount of news per day, like certainly not catching it on the hour every hour, just maybe once or twice a day, just to stay up to speed.
I think that's it, and maybe then it's reducing it late at night time, coming into your sleep period and stuff like that, so that you might have it at 6 or 5 or 6 or whatever, and then you might decide then to, that's it. What more do I need to consume about that? You know?
Yeah. Well, what about then? Let's say for people returning to the workplace, and we've got such a mix out there. There's maybe introverts, extroverts. The introverts have probably been maybe enjoying their time at home. Who knows? And now they're almost being they might see it as they're being forced back into the workplace, to a very uncomfortable space. Whereas others will be relishing the opportunity to go back in. That's the challenge facing a lot of, I guess, HR managers now, to find that balance, to try and find a happy medium to support as many people as possible. Is there any way to kind of manage that, do you think, the different kind of levels of anxiety?
Yeah, well, I do think people, the introverts were very comfortable going back, retreating back into their own spaces and stuff like that. Now, I don't necessarily think that was very good, because the coming back out is just going to be more stress oriented, more anxiety provoking. So I think this whole key message is about gradual, noticing people that are engaged in avoidant behavior, because that's a sort of a yellow flag that there's something going on there. A person might need additional supports. Obviously, flagging up the internal employee assistance program. I think creating some events, maybe some events could be slightly outdoors and indoors, that you're sort of engaging in outdoor environment, get people used to connecting with each other and then retreating back in for coffees and stuff like that. So I think some of the what, sorry, I'm trying to read that at the same time. I'll read that in a second. I won't read it. I'll let you pitch that at me, and then so and some practical steps, I think, then around getting people back in. Just as I said, like noticing use of avoidance, creating good energy levels in advance. I think the commute and childcare, I think it's the practical issues that for most people, I think some of it will be psychological, maybe 10 or 15%, but I think another 15%, I think 70% will just get on with it and be fine. Another 30, I think good 30% will really struggle around the practical nature of the commute, the time, their change in their work-life balance, the loss of what might be seen as quality of lifetime and stuff like that, the capacity, maybe dropping kids off to school, and the flexibility around that, and coming back. And I think that's going to be a way bigger factor than some of the psychological issues that some people will have, who maybe might have internal vulnerability because they might be post-cancer survivor, they're on immunotherapy, they might have some chronic disease type profile. So that will be a subgroup, a significant subgroup, but I think a bigger subgroup will be the whole disruption. This is a very disruptive piece. But then the upside of the reconnecting is the re-engagement in the workplace, and there's strengths to that as well.
Very good, yeah. And Ava is asking, just to think about that around the idea facilitating as a student and staff engagement with events, programs as people return to campus, and she's kind of struggling with that. But I wonder, is that struggling because maybe it's early? Some people are just not ready for that, for the return to events, for the return to interaction. I mean, some people will be, but you'll probably be only attracting the people that are actually ready to come back for those events, depending on the nature of those events, though.
Yeah, it does. I think it depends on the events. I'm not like maybe lecturers are habituated out of not of doing home-based teaching, and they're struggling to get back, and might be just not about bringing them back into that. Could be more getting persons on site and doing face-to-face.
Yeah.
I'm unsure about the events and stuff like
It
that.
might be kind of creating a space that's an enticing space to encourage people back in to sell the connection side of things, the collaboration opportunities when you're together with your colleagues, kind of the fun and interactive side of things. It's possibly more around that.
Yeah, I'm just unclear of the events that are being
Yeah.
organised there to try and manage that. But I'd love to hear if you've any other questions. I'd love if you could just pop them in. Just you always say you're asking on behalf of somebody else, and you can stick in a question there. We'd love
Well,
love to see that.
I'm kind of asking on behalf of someone else here, Eddie. So tomorrow there's someone I know very well who's going back for speaking of disruption. This individual is facing it now tomorrow, going back to full day of training, delivering that tomorrow in Dublin city centre. But it's all day. So for the first time in over 2 years, like, he won't be bringing his daughter to school. He won't be bringing his little boy for a spin around as well in the morning, giving mommy a break, that kind of thing. So just a real change to the whole setup. So that's just one example. I'm sure there's hundreds of thousands of those. It's the routine that's being like, it was tough changing initially, and now we're in almost the change is back again, isn't it? It's managing that change or disruption to the routine.
Psychologists aren't mind readers, so that sounds very close to home, Brian. Is that you by any chance?
It is. Yeah, so I'm just delighted to be going back in. First of all, it's fantastic to be delivering live sessions again in person. But it's funny, isn't it? Like, it does just kind of shake up the routine, and the whole household is kind of turned upside down almost as a result of it.
It's a big shake. I know that whether it's giving online presentations or in-person presentations, I've gone back to both myself, and I mean, I do think there's strengths to both. Like, if you're geographically diverse workforce, or if you want something that's in and out, but very discreet and bespoke, we're there for that. If you want something that's in person more, and I think the humor and the interaction, the humanity, I think if you're doing a 1-day workshop like you're doing that in person, but it is disruptive. This is a change, you see, and change will always bring a level of, like, fundamentally, life is about change. Human beings is our capacity to adapt. People who you want in organizations are people who are orientated towards change, because, like, change is the constant. And if you are if you think of a car and, like, the rear view mirror, and if you want that you're always looking, oh, I want things the way they were, I want things the way they were. And if your rear view mirror is getting bigger than your forward window, then it becomes problematic. You get a little bit stuck in there, something like
that. Yeah, very true. And you're back in person as well. How are you finding that? Are people really engaging, or what's kind of the reaction been to your own in-person?
So the in-person, like, for the last 2 years we've done online, and I've actually, interestingly, I've really enjoyed that online piece, because it's engaging around workplace well-being, different, like, stress. I'm doing talks on reconnecting now and managing the return to the workplace, and particularly because a lot of people are in that cusp now of the returning to the office, whether it's on the financial side or marketing or commercial companies or manufacturing, whatever it is. There's been, like, quite often it's also crafting that message is important, because in some areas there people have been in the workplace, like the engineering side, the maintenance side. So it's really about ensuring that there's core message going out isn't letting the people know that they have been working. And in fact, I think about, like, people have worked incredibly through a pandemic, and they've proven like they can be productive. They can be so many different things. So the in-person piece then is around for that. That, I suppose, it's very hard. It's the third variable. It's that human interaction that often you get missed in the digital. But if you think about digitally here today, we're going out to over 200 people. We're going right dispersed throughout the country, so there's an advantage to that, and an in-person site. So you have a different sense of your provision to the individual, to the companies, based on their needs.
Yeah, very true. I think we're going to Amsterdam and Zaragoza as well, so even further afield today, which is fantastic. You hinted at earlier on. You were talking about the lessons learned, and from this that you'd like to see us keep. Here's one I think. Well, I'd love to see us keep. I think we will keep, and that's around the autonomy. For some people might call it flexibility. I'd call it autonomy around our working hours and our working day and our working location. And Daniel Pink talks about this. This is one of the main drivers of motivation. What motivates people is having a little bit of autonomy in our how we work. And so I think we're here. A lot of HR leaders will be hearing this now from their colleagues saying, "Look, I don't want to work in the office full time. I'll do 2 days, I'll do 3 days, whatever it might be. But I do want that little bit of flexibility at home." So people are exercising a bit of autonomy in how they work. Maybe they have a bit of a say in the hours they start and finish, this kind of idea. And also inputting then into the specific tasks they might be completing as well. So that's something I think will stay. And I think organizations, for the most part, are being quite flexible in that area as well, and accommodating where possible that bit of extra autonomy for people.
So I think what you're calling autonomy is also control, because if you allow people to control certain things, whether you talk about your time of work, that control, the benefits, the upside of that is a more engaged worker, is the worker is going, it's going to sit retention and all these different areas that it's going to have a huge impact. The piece I'd like to say, and I'd like to go forward piece, is the boundaries, actually. I'd like that's the bit I would like, because I often think when the boundaries, when the boundaries, I think, is really important in life, whether it's in our personal lives, in our relationships, and in our work home life. Boundaries are critically important, and that capacity for boundaries is I'd like to have that going forward. That people would have talked about rituals and routines, that they would have closed away their laptop, put it away, or some people weren't fortunate enough to be in a big enough environment that they might have been in a very small environment, but they were able to put the laptop away. Others were able to close the door. Some people went for walks. Some people showered after work, but there was a symbolic ending of the working day. And I think, even if you're going in that hybrid model, or that you maintain a boundary piece, I think that's critically important to our well-being.
Yeah, very well said. And if there's any final questions or comments or thoughts for Dr. Eddie, please post them in the chat now. Eddie, what are your own kind of final thoughts or comments, or what would you like to see now for the rest of the year? It's a bit of it's an interesting phase as workplaces welcome people back, as people readjust. But by the end of the year, I mean, do you think will we be back to kind of some kind of normal, or what do you think?
Well, I'm not going to make any predictions, because I think anyone that ever made a prediction it's just so challenging, really, at the moment, to make any prediction. So I want to wish people to try and maybe reflect on what they've learned, bring that forward, be open to a level of flexibility, to use all their buffering and coping and mechanisms to enhance their own well-being, so they're coming back in to what will be a stressful, in terms of the commute and stuff like that. Maybe to look at that flexibility, autonomy piece as well, that employers and people can meet in the middle. I think that would be really important. I think that and I don't really want to predict, but I know that the psychological impact, whether it's about reconnecting, come back into the workspace, or whether it's around building resilience, and I've lots of different talks and different areas, building resilience and tackling everyday challenges, or reconnecting in the workplace. These are all areas, and if you want me to talk in your company, I'm available.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ed. And I've put up here's our email addresses there. If anyone has questions they didn't want to ask, online, that's absolutely fine. Drop us a note. Eddie delivers his workshops now as well, in person or on site, which is fantastic. Great to be able to have that flexibility, have that option now, isn't it? Eddie, listen, thanks so much for your time. Always great to chat with you. Always bring some kind of great detail to the table, and always really interactive as well. Really appreciate your time, Eddie.
Thank you very much. Thanks you, everybody. Take care now.
Take care, everyone. Listen, have a great Tuesday. See you on the next webinar.